I was always told that our family business was something special, a legacy that had been passed down from generation to generation. It wasn't the largest, but it was well respected in our town. My parents had worked hard to keep it running, and for years it seemed like nothing could bring it down. But I never imagined how quickly things could unravel. It all started a few years ago, when they made a series of bad investments. They took out a couple of loans to expand the business, hoping to grow it even further. At first, it seemed like a good idea. They were confident, excited about the prospects, and for a while things looked promising. But then the market shifted. Customers started pulling away, competitors started outsmarting us, and the loans became harder to pay off. Soon, the debts began piling up. My parents tried to ignore the warning signs, hoping things would turn around. But I could see the stress on their faces, the constant worry, the sleepless nights. They weren't the same. They started making hasty decisions, cutting corners, and even laying off employees, all in an attempt to salvage what was left. But nothing seemed to work. It wasn't long before I realized that if something didn't change, the business that had been in our family for decades was going to collapse. My parents were too proud to admit that they couldn't handle it anymore, so I decided I had to step in. I wasn't even sure if I could save the company, but I knew I had to try. I'd just finished college and was trying to build my career in finance, but I put everything on hold. I drained my savings, took out a personal loan, and started managing the finances for the business. I had no idea what I was doing at first, but I knew I had to learn quickly. I worked 15-hour days, cutting costs, negotiating with creditors, and restructuring the business from the ground up. It was exhausting, and I felt like I was drowning in stress, but every time I saw my parents' worried faces, I reminded myself why I was doing it. The business didn't turn around overnight, but over the next several months, things started to improve. I managed to renegotiate our debt repayment schedule, bring in new clients, and stabilize the cash flow. Slowly but surely, the company was saved. My parents, who had been so worried about losing everything, were finally able to breathe again. I remember the day they told me they were proud of me. It was the first time in months I saw a genuine smile on their faces. I thought things were finally getting back to normal. I had sacrificed so much to help them, and I truly believed they appreciated it. But the strange thing was, even though we were all relieved and grateful for the business's recovery, things started changing. It wasn't immediately obvious, but over time, I began to feel like I wasn't part of the plan anymore. It was subtle at first, the small comments, the cold stares when I asked for an update on the business decisions. My dad, who used to consult me about every major decision, now made choices without even asking for my input. My mom started treating me like an outsider, as if I wasn't part of the family anymore. Then came the day I overheard them talking, behind closed doors. My dad was saying that it was time to bring in some new blood, and my mom agreed. They were talking about selling a portion of the business to outside investors. They were talking about replacing me. I was shocked. Here I was, the one who had saved their business, and they were already planning to push me out. They didn't even seem to care about what I had done. It felt like a betrayal. But instead of confronting them immediately, I kept quiet, observing how they would handle things. I wanted to see if this was just a passing thought, or something they were seriously considering. Weeks went by, and I kept my head down, working as hard as I could to keep the business running smoothly. But the tension in the air was growing. I could feel it, even if they were trying to pretend like everything was fine. They had stopped consulting me, stopped acknowledging my contributions, and it seemed like I was just another employee to them. They were treating me like I hadn't played a crucial role in the business's survival. Finally, the breaking point came. One evening, my dad called me into his office. I could tell something was off. I had been doing my best to stay out of the way, trying not to make waves, but I knew this conversation wasn't going to be easy. "Look," my dad began, avoiding eye contact. "We've been thinking." I knew exactly what was coming. I could feel the anger rising in me, but I kept it in check, bracing myself for what I had to hear. "We think it's time for you to move on," he said, finally meeting my gaze. "We're bringing in someone else to help run things. You've done great, but we need someone with more experience." I couldn't believe it. After everything I had done to save this business, after the long nights, the sleepless days, the sacrifice, and now they wanted me gone? They were telling me I wasn't good enough to run it, that my help wasn't enough. I was stunned. My mind raced as I tried to process the words, trying not to let the tears well up. I wasn't angry. I was devastated. I thought we were a team, that we were in this together. But instead, it felt like they had just used me. And now that things were back to normal, they didn't want me anymore. "You're not the problem, son," my dad added quickly, almost as if trying to justify the decision. "We just need someone to take the business to the next level." The next level. Was that code for getting rid of me? It took everything in me to hold my ground. I stood there, silent, as the anger and confusion churned inside me. I was on the verge of telling them exactly how I felt, but I kept it inside. For the first time, I realized how little they truly valued me. The family business that I had saved, the legacy I had worked so hard to protect, it wasn't mine anymore. I walked out of the room without saying another word. I didn't know what to do next, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over. After the meeting with my dad, I spent the rest of the evening in a daze. It was hard to process what had just happened. I kept replaying his words over and over in my head. "We think it's time for you to move on." I couldn't make sense of it. I had poured so much of myself into that business, sacrificing so many things. I had worked long hours, drained my savings, and even put my personal dreams on hold. But all that didn't seem to matter now. The next few days were even more uncomfortable. The silence at home was deafening. My parents had been distant before, but now it was as if there was an invisible wall between us. They avoided eye contact, didn't make small talk, and whenever I tried to bring up the business, they quickly changed the subject. It was as if I had never been a part of their plans in the first place. At first, I tried to brush it off. I told myself that maybe it was just a phase, that they were stressed and didn't know how to handle the transition after everything had happened. But the more time passed, the clearer it became that this wasn't a temporary situation. They had made their decision, and now it was just a matter of me accepting it. Then one day, I walked into the office to find my mom and dad talking to an outsider. A man in his mid-40s, well-dressed, and clearly very experienced in the field. They were discussing future business plans, and I could tell that the conversation was about me. I overheard my dad mention bringing him on as a consultant to help steer the company toward new growth. I wasn't sure what they meant by new growth, but I knew it didn't include me. My mom looked at me when I entered, but quickly looked away as if she had been caught. I stood there for a moment, trying to absorb what was happening. My stomach twisted in knots. The betrayal felt sharp and raw. They didn't even have the decency to discuss it with me first. The person I had helped save the company was now the one being quietly edged out, replaced by someone else. That night, I sat down with my parents and confronted them. The anger that had been simmering inside me for days finally erupted. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. "Why?" I asked, voice trembling but firm. "Why are you doing this? After everything I did for this business, you're just going to push me aside like I don't matter?" My dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He avoided my gaze and mumbled something about new perspectives and fresh ideas. But I wasn't buying it. It wasn't about fresh ideas. It was about control. They wanted to run the business their way, without anyone questioning their decisions, even if that meant ignoring the person who had literally saved them from financial ruin. "We're just trying to move forward," my mom said, her voice low. "It's nothing personal." But it felt personal. Every word, every decision felt like a slap in the face. I couldn't understand how they could be so cold about it. It wasn't like I had asked for recognition or fame. I just wanted to be a part of what we built together. But now it seemed like that wasn't enough. I was left with one burning question. What was I supposed to do now? The family business was my life. I had sacrificed so much, and now they were telling me I didn't belong. I felt lost, betrayed, and more alone than I had ever felt in my entire life. For the next few weeks, things went from bad to worse. My parents, who once leaned on me for every major decision, now excluded me from meetings and discussions. It was as if I no longer existed in the business they had built with me. I was being treated like a mere employee, even though I was the one who had brought it back from the brink of collapse. But I wasn't going to let them push me out that easily. I couldn't just walk away without a fight. I had invested too much in this, and no one, especially not my parents, was going to take that away from me without facing the consequences. I started planning. I began to look into my options, researching ways to protect my interests and ensure that I wouldn't be left empty-handed. I knew I had no legal claim to the business, but there had to be something I could do. Something that would show my parents that they couldn't simply erase me from the picture. The more I thought about it, the clearer the solution became. If they wanted to exclude me, fine. But I wasn't going to sit idly by and let them run things into the ground again, especially not without my help. I had saved them once, and I would find a way to do it again, on my terms. I started gathering information about the family assets, looking into the financial details of the business. There was one thing that had been bothering me for weeks, though. Something that I had ignored in my rush to help them in the first place. My parents had always talked about their plans for the future, about how they wanted the business to stay within the family. But now, all of that seemed like empty words. The more I looked, the more I realized that there was something deeply wrong with how they were handling things. I knew that I wasn't the only one who had been left out of the picture. As much as they had tried to control the situation, the truth was clear. They had been hiding things from me, and it was time to find out what they were really up to. It took a few weeks of carefully observing and doing some research, but I finally uncovered the truth. My parents weren't just trying to push me out of the business. They were preparing to sell it. The thought hit me like a ton of bricks. They had been hiding financial statements from me, manipulating numbers, and even contacting potential buyers behind my back. I was both furious and heartbroken. All the hard work, all the sacrifices I had made were about to be erased. The business that I had helped save, the business that I had put everything into, was about to be sold off to the highest bidder. And I had no say in it. I didn't waste any time. I started gathering evidence, documenting everything I had found. My parents might have thought they could get away with it, but I wasn't going to let them sell off the family legacy without putting up a fight. One evening, I decided to confront them once again. I couldn't sit idly by any longer. This time, though, I was prepared. I walked into the living room with a folder full of evidence, emails, financial records, and even the names of the buyers they had been in talks with. It was time to show them that I knew exactly what they were doing. "Mom, Dad," I began, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know what's going on. You're planning to sell the business, and I'm not going to let you." They both froze. My dad's face went pale, and my mom avoided my gaze. They knew they were caught. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded. "Why didn't you include me in this decision?" My mom looked at me, her face etched with guilt. "We didn't think you'd understand. You've always been so focused on the numbers and the work. We didn't want to burden you with the stress." "Burden me?" I shot back, my anger flaring. "I've spent years working myself into the ground for this company. You can't just make this decision without me, without even telling me what's going on. This business is as much mine as it is yours." Dad finally spoke, his voice low. "We didn't think you were ready to take over. We thought it would be better to sell it off now, while it still had some value. You've made a lot of good decisions, but we don't want to put this on your shoulders. We thought you'd be relieved." Relieved? I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. How could they think I would be relieved? This wasn't just a business to me. This was my life. I had helped build it, helped save it, and now they were willing to throw it all away without so much as a conversation. You don't get to decide that for me, I told them. I want a stake in this. If you're really serious about selling, I want to be part of the process. If not, then I'm going to fight you on this. I'm not just going to let you take away what I've worked for. There was a long silence. My parents exchanged a look, and for the first time in what felt like years, they seemed to be considering my feelings. But even then, I could tell they were still hesitant. They had already made up their minds, and it wasn't easy to change. I'm not asking you to take over everything, my dad said slowly, but we think it might be time for you to go in a different direction. Maybe this isn't the right place for you anymore. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They weren't just planning to sell. They were trying to push me out of the family legacy entirely. It wasn't about the business anymore. It was about control, about keeping everything in their hands and leaving me with nothing. I wasn't about to give up, though. I couldn't. This was my last chance to prove that I was more than just a worker in my parents' eyes. This was my chance to claim my rightful place. So I did what I had to do. I hired a lawyer. The next few days were a whirlwind of phone calls, emails, and tense meetings. My lawyer helped me get the ball rolling, starting the process of legally claiming my stake in the business. It wasn't easy, and it was far from cheap, but I knew it was the only way forward. While my parents were busy making their own plans, I was making mine. I found out everything I needed to know about the business's financials, its legal standing, and the potential buyers. My lawyer and I carefully mapped out a strategy to not only stop the sale, but to ensure that I would get a fair share of what was rightfully mine. Eventually, the day came when my parents had to face the consequences of their actions. They had gone too far. The truth was out, and now they had no choice but to listen to me. I sat down with them one final time. This isn't just about the business, I told them. It's about respect. It's about recognizing what I've done for this family. For this company, I'm not asking for special treatment, but I am asking for what I deserve. And if we can't find a way to work together, then I'll find another way to protect my future. It wasn't an easy conversation, but by the end of it, they knew I wasn't backing down. The sale of the business was halted, and we agreed to work out a deal that would give me a rightful stake in the company's future. It wasn't the perfect resolution, but it was a victory. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had regained control of my life. The next few weeks were filled with tension, paperwork, and negotiations. It felt like everything I had worked for had finally come to a boiling point. But despite the frustration and the emotional roller coaster, I realized something important. I had grown. I had learned that I couldn't always rely on my parents to make the right decisions for me, especially when it came to my future. The deal we finally reached wasn't ideal, but it was fair. I would have a stake in the business, a say in how it was run, and most importantly, I wouldn't be left out in the cold anymore. My parents, while reluctant at first, started to see things from my perspective. They realized that I wasn't just an employee or a helper in their eyes. I was their partner. And with that realization, a new chapter began. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but we started to rebuild it. The wolves of resentment and frustration that had been building for years began to slowly come down. My parents understood that I wasn't just fighting for the business. I was fighting for my place in this family, for the recognition I had, long deserved. But the most significant change wasn't just in how I was viewed in the family. It was in how I viewed myself. For the first time in years, I felt confident. I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. I wasn't just the person who had to fix everyone else's problems anymore. I had a future of my own to look forward to, a future that I had fought for and earned. Months passed, and the business continued to thrive. With the new partnership in place, my parents and I started to work together more effectively. We didn't always agree, but we found ways to compromise. The business became stronger, and so did our family. We learned to trust each other again, and then something unexpected happened. One evening, my parents sat me down and offered me the ultimate test of trust. They told me they were ready to hand over more control to me, to let me take on more responsibilities, even some of the major decisions. It wasn't the full takeover that I had once dreamed of, but it was a step in the right direction. It was a recognition that I wasn't just a bystander in my own future. I was a leader. In that moment, I realized that all the struggles and sacrifices had been worth it. I had spent years fighting for my place, for the right to be seen as more than just a helper or an outsider in my own family. And now, I had what I had worked for. Not just a business, but a family that finally understood my value. My parents weren't perfect, and neither was I, but we had learned to navigate our differences. We had built something stronger together, and it felt like we were finally a team. Looking back, I knew I had come a long way. From feeling like an outsider in my own family to being an equal partner in the business, I had earned my place. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was worthy anymore. I knew it for myself. And as for my parents, they had learned a valuable lesson too. They realized that love and family weren't just about taking care of each other financially. It was about respect, trust, and recognition. And in the end, that was more important than any business deal.